we're still gonna give people time to get here, so, yeah. Okay, so Shane, you're gonna be on here.
Okay.
And I think you'll probably see people come on.
Nice to meet you.
Thanks for coming. What program are you part of?
Good scholars.
Oh, so glad you're here. Hi, Corey. Well, we're so glad you're here. So we invited some of the other scholar programs to join us. So if you see, you can leave the door open, but if you want to throw your stuff in Tony's office, you're welcome to. And I'm gonna go sit
What
back
year
to
are
the
you?
students.
How's it going so far for you? Cool. What you study?
Corey, help yourself if you want something hot to drink.
I'm I'm actually a seminary student, but it's undergrad here. I studied.
Hey, man.
Nice to meet you. Heard a lot of good things.
I hope one or two of them are true.
Do you know?
Went to the chapel first.
Sarah.
Chapel
Oh,
every day for 2 years. Well,
She's on
every
that-
Monday for 2 years.
yeah.
Yeah.
Creature of habit.
Yeah.
You were there for.
Anybody else go to the chapel except for me? I was like, all the lights are out. We're not meeting the chapel.
Yeah, it's all right.
Yeah.
Made it.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
how are you?
Doing good, man. Yeah, wasn't too hard to commute out here.
Yeah.
Where are you
All
from?
right. Okay, bye.
Around here?
Initially here. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
So I gave tours. So I go to the seminary.
Okay.
And we had like
You have something hot to drink. Help yourself if you want. And you know there are any-
And so they gave us like a little background and everything. I heard they used to live like down Zeus.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Name of the building. It's like way down that way. It's like a littler building.
Oh, yeah, the damn cottage over here.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember that thing.
Yeah, they're not- yeah.
Part of the reason students can't live there anymore. No.
Yeah.
We had like 4 of us in there and, oh, man, it was good times.
Yeah. That's
Have a
awesome.
drum set in the backyard. Yeah. Mr. Woods remembers that. He was our neighbor over there.
How are you?
Can't do quite the same now. Yeah. And now it's facilities over there.
Oh, okay. It's a cool little building.
It is.
Hi, Aiden.
It's just all
It's like a tiny house living for 4 of us, you know, like back in the day there. Hello.
Hello, I'm Grace.
Grace, good to meet you. What was your name? Sarah, cool. I'm Shane, good to be with you. Hello. Got a few people on the online.
Oh, good. You're getting on. Good.
Yeah.
Shmika. She's a mom, Shmika.
Finally starting to act like winter.
Yay.
Or snow.
What
God.
that sounds
Do
so
you live
enthusiastic.
around here too? Like, I know you're kind of all over,
I
but.
live in Kensington, so like North Philly. Okay, cool. Yeah.
No.
Where were you at?
They talk after, I don't know, it's her name.
It's been a few years, but
Okay.
yeah. Oh, you know what? I was there for a meeting.
Okay,
Might have seen you there. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, it was in last year, all last year.
Yeah. I was there for a meeting last year, I think.
So you know Kim.
A little bit,
Okay.
yeah. There's,
I think because we're.
I used to go there pretty regularly. I can't even remember what. We were overlapping some programming or something, but yeah. So it's a nice little place, a lot of love in this there now.
Yeah. Yeah. I know, and then.
The simple way.
All right, you guys, we're gonna get started. I'm just gonna turn it here. Robert's just gonna introduce Shane real quick and then, so welcome. Thanks for being experimental. And hi, hey, want to come in? Yeah, come on in. Yeah. I think that chair next to Abby is open. It's Brian, one of our deans of the honors college.
All right, what's up?
So,
Good thing.
All right. Well, hey, good morning, everyone here gathered, everyone online. We're delighted to be together. My name is Robert Godier. I guess no, this is totally asshole. Let's introduce myself to strangers. So this is a new format for us, really much more informal. We're together in the Campolo Center's office, and we're very pleased and honored to be joined by our good friend, Shane Claiborne. And he's a fellow alum, so he's a student here at Eastern. And he was a founder of the Simple Way and co-founder of Red Letter Christians. Recently received an award for his social justice activism from the King Center. And he is the author of numerous books, including his most recent one, just came out, Rethinking Life. He's been a very good activist for faith and justice. And we're so glad you're here to share with us about raw tools and all the other good things you're up to. So please join me in welcoming Shane.
Thanks, Al. Good to see all of you in person and on the stream here. Well, this is great. I've spent a lot of time in this office and on this campus. And, I thought, we won't make this too formal, but we can make it substantial and just talk together and share a little bit. My wife says that a lot of preachers are good at answering questions that people aren't even asking. I didn't want to come, totally canned with a talk or anything, but there's a few things that we've been celebrating. By the way, most of you, all of you are going to come down on Dr. King Day, and that got thrown off a little for us by the wonderful surprise of getting that award down at the King Center from Dr. Bernice King and others. So we were kind of moving a lot of parts around, but hopefully we can get you down to Kensington to hang out in our little neck of the woods sometime. So this last month was marked 25 years. Just throw it all out there. That's how long we've been at it. So we, when I was undergrad here at Eastern, there was a group of poor and homeless families in North Philadelphia that had moved into an abandoned church building, and that's really what started things originally as kind of a student solidarity movement. A lot of us were very, very involved in that struggle for housing, and then out of that, 6 or so of us pulled our money together, bought a little row house, which is still where the Simple Way is hubbed. And now over the last 25 years, it's turned into kind of a village. There's all kinds of murals and community gardens and things that we're doing. We had a big fire about 2 years ago. And so we've had to rebuild that whole area that was destroyed in the fire. Next month, we're dedicating a new community center there that our friends at Esperanza Health Center have kind of created this incredible space that we'll be able to share. There'll also be a cafe there called the Phoenix Cafe because it came up out of the ashes of the fire. So it's pretty awesome. So we'll get you down sometimes. And our latest work, it's very holistic. Hey, come on in. When you live somewhere for a while, you start to keep growing deeper roots into the neighborhood. And for us, that means asking deeper questions about, as we're giving out food every week. When I was leaving this morning, there's people already getting ready to receive food bags. We do that multiple times a week, hundreds and hundreds of bags of food, but we're also asking why people are hungry to begin with, and I think, Robert was saying, what are some of the things that I would have liked to have heard more about before we started the community 25 years ago as kind of a framework for our conversation today. And one of those is that we need to be doing the relief work and the compassion work, the giving out food, but we've also got to do the work of justice and, figuring out why these inequities exist to begin with. Right now, you may be following that our schools are going, bankrupt. There's now a lawsuit between the education department and the city. And you start to, my wife worked in the school right next to us, and literally the roof was leaking and they don't have air conditioning. And so the kids have to be released from school when it gets, you ready for this, 104 degrees, because they can't concentrate, you know, and you're like, that's pretty messed up, you know, that we've got money we can pull out of the air anytime we want a war, but we can't, you know, provide the things that we need for our kids in the school. So those things are, I think, like one of the things that, hey, come on in. One of the things that continues to energize me for this work is feeling like we're working on the macro side and on the grassroots side, right? So a lot of my friends that I see get tired. Sometimes it's because they've maybe had a little too heavy of a foot on one of those without the other. And I mean, I can see that in myself too. I'm not immune to that, right? But like, I start to get a little tired if all I'm doing is giving people bags of food without like really, you know, getting in the streets, getting in DC and talking about some of those inequities. But I also have friends that are working on the policy side of some of these things that I see them start to get tired if they haven't helped a kid with homework or had a snowball fight, like in the grid of it, you know, like in the real relationships. And so I think whether it's immigration or healthcare or whatever, I mean, I'm sure there's lots of different passions in this room, but I think one of the things that's been really true for me is to keep things very relational and intimate and on the ground in our neighborhood, but also like addressing some of those bigger issues that are kind of crushing people's hope and dignity. And, you know, in light of that, like one of the things that we started doing recently, as some of you know, is taking the guns off the streets and turning them into garden tools. And I brought you a little show and tell here. I mean, you got it displayed on the wall, but that love sign was made in our shop, which we just shop where we can do this work specifically of getting guns off the streets. They're all donated and turning them into garden tools. So these are the tools that we make, and we make signs.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can, all of us.
Hello, can you hear me?
So
Can you hear me?
How do you
Hello,
do a math?
hello, can you hear me?
How do we do a
Yeah,
Can
math?
you hear me?
yeah,
Yeah,
hey.
we can hear you. Is it in more?
Yeah, Miss Wanda, you're loud and clear there. Good to see you. Welcome.
Thank you.
So this has been very meaningful work, and some of this started. I don't know how much you all have tracked this particular work, because we were going to have you in the shop on Dr. King Day, which is also a really good day to honor Dr. King by beating some guns into plows. But this is what happened for me was we had a 19-year-old that was killed right in front of our house, and I was able to hold his hand and pray with him as the ambulance came. And the next day we found out that he didn't make it. And for me, that was one of those times where I really resonated with Dr. King's words when he said that we're all called to be the good Samaritan and lift our neighbor out of the ditch. But after you lift so many people out of the ditch, you start to want to do something about the road to Jericho, you know, to figure out like, how can we keep people from ending up in the ditch to begin with? So this work, you know, we started over 10 years ago, and taking guns and transforming them. Both my wife, Katie, and I have both been apprenticing blacksmiths and metal crafters. So I'll pass it. And last week, we learned to turn them. So these handles are made, they're made out of the wood stock from the rifles and guns. So every part of this is from, you know, gun parts. So, yeah.
We're learning.
So, so part of what we do as we do that work too, is we center the people who have been impacted. And I'm finding that like we do public demonstrations of this all the time, where we'll fire up the forge and we'll have a gun donated and we'll decommission it, we'll chop it so it's no longer operable. But then we, you know, folks will share their own experiences, their own stories. And I find that it moves people in a way that just a sermon doesn't, you know, like you're really it's like when it comes to gun violence, a lot of people bristle up because it's such a contestable, issue, the policies around guns and stuff. But when you hear someone share their story, it kind of moves you in your heart, and your head sometimes can follow your heart. So I've also found it to be very effective organizing. It's therapeutic as well, especially on days like yesterday where we have another mass shooting, which likely I think has happened with an AR-15 again. And so, these military style weapons that are just designed to do so much damage. We just chopped them up. We got an AR-15 that was donated from Philly. So it feels like not only is it symbolic and poetic and beautiful, but it's also like really substantial. You feel like you're participating in, as Jesus said, the kingdom coming on earth as it is in heaven. What is God's dream for this world? Well, I think it's for swords to be turned into plows and AR-15s into shovels, and to move from death to life, from violence to peace. So that's kind of a part of our work. And the thing, I would say, like, thinking back on the last 25 years, and as you guys are, wrestling with some of these things, I think we've got to find ways that we can move people to see the humanity behind the issues, right? So when it comes to gun violence, Dr. Cornel West says we need to let the suffering speak, right? So like that's what we're doing with this work, is letting the suffering speak, centering those who are survivors and been impacted. I think there's lots of ways that we can do that, but a lot of our organizing work when it comes to justice issues has been to really amplify the people who have been impacted. With the opioid crisis in Philadelphia, we've lost 1,200 lives in the last year. And we started to think, how can we create a sense of urgency around that, and not just the same debates? I mean, one of the big debates that's divided our city right now, as you may know, is like safe injection sites. So like many people in Philadelphia would like to be the first city in the United States to have what's often called overdose prevention site, safe injection site, places where folks can use heroin in a monitored setting. And so it's a huge debate. And but we just see so many lives being lost, and also the kids in our neighborhood that are being impacted by that every day. Like everywhere you walk in at least in our neighborhood, there are orange caps from the needles. There's needles everywhere. So we had our kids, we were hanging out with some of the kids, and they really sparked this idea a couple of years ago of let's have a campaign, need a little help. And let's gather up all these needles and let's put them in jars, and we'll deliver them to our city officials. So we did that. We had hundreds and hundreds of needles that we had picked up just off of our own sidewalks and garden spaces. And we put them in jars, and we delivered them publicly. We did a press conference, and we had a petition signed by hundreds and hundreds of families in Kensington saying this is a public health crisis, and we don't need more jails. We need more treatment spaces. It's, but we also said this is unacceptable. Like kids in Rittenhouse, they don't worry about tripping over needles. And so we need the folks in our zip code to be honored with the same dignity, while at the same time, honoring the dignity of those who are addicted. But this is not impossible. We can do better. And so we delivered those jars of needles, and of course it got a lot of attention, but it also, I think, moved folks. I've got there's city council folks that still say they've got the jar on their wall to remind them of the lives that are at stake and the urgency of that. And it was right after this that the city declared a state of emergency, and I think they still need to do more, just for the record, but there was a response, right? And there was some real action steps, some new resources that were put towards it, but I think that this is what Dr. King and so many other folks did, is they, Dr. King said that our work when it comes to organizing is to expose injustice so that it becomes so uncomfortable that people can't help but respond. So we really move people, whatever the issue is, whether it's gun violence or the opioid crisis that we immigration, we're finding ways to expose the injustice and so that it does make people uncomfortable, because the people who are being impacted by this are very uncomfortable. And so the folks in City Hall and in DC that are making decisions need to feel some of that urgency too, right? So that's kind of like one part of this, is that I think figuring out, like thinking through the connection between showing compassion and love and offering our gifts and service to neighborhoods, while also becoming kind of champions of justice and raising the questions of how do we make some policy changes and some systemic changes that might make our world look a little bit more like how God wants it to look, right? So let me just stop for a second. I mean, there's more that I'll share, but see how that feels to y'all. If there's questions, I'm looking at y'all online too. You can give me one of those hand waves if you want to, if you have a thought or question. I think you're all muted right now because we were having some background noise, but we can unmute you. You'll try to help me with that, right? So we'll watch for you there. But anybody here, you want to share just on what I've already shared?
Something I really thought was like beautiful and something I kind of kept thinking about when you're passing the tools around is by like giving the tool, like those guns, a new life. It's kind of like proving that it's not necessarily the metal and the wood of that like object that is the problem, but that you can give that new life and repurpose it and show that like, the metal and the wood aren't the problem, like the violence and the people are the problem. So I thought that was really cool. You give new life to that, like those material objects.
Yeah, thanks. I hope y'all can hear. We'll try to talk as loud as we can. I think they could probably hear you. Yeah, I mean, that's part of what we're sort of declaring, is that all things can be made new, right? I sometimes tell people this is what a gun looks like when it gets born again. And part of what we believe is that hearts can change too. And that's one of those things where I think it's so important to, a part of what you'll hear me sharing today is like avoiding these binary ways of thinking, right? That this is just a heart issue or it's just a policy issue. It's both, right? Like we have a gun problem and a heart problem. And I think God heals hearts. No law can change a racist heart, a violent heart. Only God can do that. But we also, as Dr. King said, a law can't make you love me, but it can make it harder for you to kill me. So let's make it harder for people to kill other folks. And right now, I think, especially when it comes to guns, we're making it really, really easy for folks to do a whole lot of damage. And every country in the world has folks that struggle with mental health, people that are violent or prone to, racist tendencies to do harm. But what's unique about America is the access to do so much harm with these weapons of, mass destruction. So, so I think that's a good point that you kind of draw out, that it is about heart change and policy change. And folks like Dr. King, like they really exempt Dr. King. I've learned a lot from Dr. King. It's also very fresh since we've, just celebrated his birthday, but that something you really see in him is this commitment to heart change and to policy change, the social and the individual. And he was critical of both capitalism and communism, because he says, communism sort of ignores the fact that we are individuals, and capitalism ignores the fact that we are more than individuals, right? There's a common good, there's a society that we need to take care for. So it's not just about personal profit.
So I love how you mentioned the macro and the micro, right? That's awesome in terms of not getting burnt out long term. And then, as we kind of all know, we're pretty intimately all acquainted with each other now. But so I wasn't raised Christian. My first job was in social work, right? And so there was no mental health social work, right? Trying to help people in that arena. And there was no spirit and no soul involved in there, right? God wasn't a piece of that. And I think that's another piece that can lead to burnout, right? That steadfastness where you feel like you're working with God and for God, right? So was curious of the spirit and the soul formation along with the heart, and what kind of goes into that in the ministry and Jesus, right? And
Cool.
Like how much you talk about that or how that works.
Well, let's spend a little time on that. I mean, just to one more little sermon image from the forge is we sometimes say, you have this sort of cold, hard metal that when you put it into the forge, it begins to soften and it begins to glow. And there's actually there's points where you can't hardly tell the metal from the fire because it begins to really take on the character of the fire. You see where this is going, right? So there's sort of a reminder constantly that we've got to keep coming back to Jesus, like that there's this sense that what keeps that fire alive is constantly returning to the source of love and our spirit in Christ. And also, I think, if you've done much camping, the way that you keep a fire stoked is by, you kind of keep stirring the coals together. And there's a part of this to me that is the reason that so much of our life has been lived in community in Philly, and like all the work that we do around gun violence is because we need that fanning of the flame that comes from being around other folks. Sometimes I say that, like, there's a reason Jesus said, where 2 or 3 of you gather, I'm with you, that this is a communal gospel. It's community-based work. And you burn out really quickly if you are alone in the work. That's the way you put a fire out, is by, scattering the coals. So we've got to keep that community alive, keep our connection to Jesus fresh. And I think that a lot of what sustains us is being around people who remind us of Jesus and who are hopeful and joyful. And we tend to rub off on each other, So the great thing about a circle of friends like this is that you can create this sort of countercultural energy together, that these values that, that are not just about making the most money, that are not just about responding to violence with violence. There's a lot of countercultural values in the gospel that we need sort of a base to work from, So I sometimes say that community is surrounding ourselves with people who remind us of Jesus, and they remind us of the kind of people that we want to become. So if you want to be more generous, hang out with generous people. If you want to be more hopeful, hang out with hopeful people. And I think when we hang out with people that are very cynical or narcissistic, that also rubs off on us, So I think that's part of why we're called to community. And I found that, like, a lot of years into our work at the Simple Way, we needed some resources to cultivate our spiritual life. And that's when we created, there's a book that we did called Common Prayer. That's daily prayers, and it's like daily practices too for keeping our spiritual life really vital. And I saw a lot of like prayer books that they were sort of about going in your closet to pray, and it was separating us from the world rather than like bringing prayer into the world that we live in. So I think we need to pray in real spaces too, and not allow our faith to become, or our prayer life to be, divorced from our activist life. Like after every mass shooting, when preachers and politicians say, we're offering thoughts and prayers, but they don't necessarily connect that to taking concrete actions that might prevent other shootings. So like that's another one of those binaries that I think should never be divorced from each other. You can be people that believe in prayer and people that believe in action. And my mentors have been both, like Dr. John Perkins, who, kind of the founder of the Christian Community Development Association movement. I can remember him like 20 years ago saying, he's passionate about prayer. He's passionate about studying the Bible. He's really, really got this old age, like this, we got to do these things because that's our, keeps our soul alive. But then he also said, if every week you find yourself praying for your neighbor to get a wheelchair ramp, then we need to get up off our knees and organize some carpenters to build a wheelchair ramp. Like sometimes God's equipped us with the resources to become the answer to the prayers that we're praying. So there is a God that is active in the world, I believe. And there's also a God that's wanting to use us, and so there's a dance there between asking God to help with these situations and being attentive to when God's, we're throwing our hands up at God going, God, we need you to do something. And God's going, I made you, like sometimes we're waiting on God and God's waiting on us. So there's sort of a dance that goes on there. But, common prayer might be a resource that works for you, but there's got to be other things I think that cultivate the spiritual practices for our soul. Otherwise, I think we can, quickly tire if you're just working on your own, out of your own energy for this work. Okay, we got a hand over here. Shamika, right? Yeah.
Yes. Hi, Shane. Thank you so much. And I actually believe we met in the midst of a visit with Tony. You were heading out and I was coming in.
Oh, sweet.
Yes. So thank you for sharing. This is awesome. My question is about your new book, Rethinking Life. I was wondering if you can kind of share that and the moment you're in your spiritual walk with God and what God is saying to you in this moment.
Cool. Well, thanks for asking. This has been one of those things that's sort of brewing for a while. And, another one of my friends, Ched Myers, he's written a lot of books, but he said, don't ever write a book unless you can not write it, like make sure it's the fire in your bones. And this kind of felt like that. The last couple of books that I've written were on pretty particular issues. So I wrote a book called Executing Grace on the death penalty and restorative justice. And also sort of really troubled by the fact that the largest demographic of supporters of the death penalty in America are Christians. And despite sort of having at the center of our faith a executed savior that said, blessed are the merciful, for they will be shown mercy. So I wrote that, like kind of digging deeper on the death penalty. And then I wrote Beating Guns around our work around gun violence, also disturbed that the highest gun owning demographic in America are Christians. Christians own guns at a higher rate than just the general population. So that was also troubling to me. I think kind of the gun and the cross offer two different versions of power. And one of them says, I'm willing to kill, and the other says, I'm willing to die. And it becomes really hard to reconcile those for me. So that's what Beating Guns is about. But then Shamika, the Rethinking Life, what I wrote that because I felt like we needed a deeper, broader base for this comprehensive ethic of life that is, it's been said we need to be pro-life from the womb to the tomb, like to not take away from one issue in favor of another, but to say, what does it really mean to be comprehensively champions for life? When I look at the early Christians, that's one of the things that I marvel at, is how passionately they were consistent in their advocacy for life. So if you read the early Christians' writings, they talk about military service and combat and how it's at odds with our Christian discipleship. Can we love our enemies and prepare to kill them? They also write about the death penalty very passionately. I mean, it didn't hurt that they were victims of the death penalty, but that they were passionately against the death penalty. They spoke against abortion, and they had many different forms of abortion in their time, but they saw that as taking the potential of life. And sometimes these were also just kids that were left, and it's called exposure, left in the woods to die. So it's very different than maybe how we would think of it. But they spoke, against the gladiatorial games, because they saw it as a sort of a glamorization of violence in their particular culture. So that kind of got me thinking on, what does it look like to really be consistently for life, and where did the cracks begin in the foundation of our spirituality? Like, so, a few hundred years in, you begin to see that ethic of life in the early church begin to crack some. And then it's not long before we have really rampant anti-Semitism connected to Christianity. We see this ranking of some lives matter more than others. Some people were born to be slaves, even in our theology, Augustine and Aquinas and others. And so St. John Chrysostom. So some of the people I love and admire and learned in seminary, they also had some holes in their theology. And you can speak truth and see through a glass dimly at the same time. So I try to be really, honest about that. And then, of course, colonization and the Crusades and the really, really horrific bloodstained, marks of history. A lot of them happened at the hands of Christians that, including Hitler, and some of our worst genocides were in places where people were holding the Bible in their hand, even to this day, right? I mean, some of, I think the potential for violence that we see in our country at the hands of armed militia and the things that manifested themselves at January 6th. There were Jesus flags and Confederate flags together. So, wrestling with some of that. Some of the questions I raise in the book in Rethinking Life are the contrast between the Black Lives Matter movement correcting and helping us declare that these lives that history has desecrated are sacred. But why is the response all lives matter? And how do we sort through that? So those are some of the things I could not write that ended up in this new book. And it's also about action. How do we not just have bumper stickers and ideology, but how do we, the question I ask all through this new book is, what does love require of us? What does love for our neighbor require of us when on each of these issues? What does loving our neighbor require of us on immigration? What does loving our neighbor require of us on abortion? What does it look like on gun violence or racism, police violence, things like that? So, yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Well, a few minutes left. Yeah. Other questions, thoughts?
Yeah. So I live near Kensington, and I think something that I see in the community is a lot of, both in terms of policymakers and citizens, really villainizing the people who are struggling with substance use disorder, especially towards people of color who are seen to be predisposed to, morally incorrect, whatever the idea is. So how, both as an organization and as a person, do you feel you're combating the villainizing? Is that something you're saying about it?
Yeah. So the question about sort of how do we affirm the dignity of folks that are wrestling with substance addiction, and it's a really, really complicated thing in our neighborhood, as it probably is in yours. There's dynamics of race and class and income, and a lot of buyers of drugs are coming from outside of our neighborhood. I mean, I meet folks all the time when I preach in suburban congregations out here in Bryn Mawr or Devon or wherever, and they're like, my kid's on Kensington Avenue, And so a lot of the folks that it's an income opportunity. I think it's important to see heroin as an economic, we call it a replacement industry. So we lost 100,000 jobs, and it's obviously a very toxic industry, but it's also why we kind of have this idea that we can't just tell kids, on the corner, don't deal drugs if we don't have all, economic alternatives to the corner. But at the same line, it's so toxic that what we've found really constructive is to build partnerships with other recovery communities. Like New Jerusalem, which if you want to visit, another community that's connected to the Simple Way, New Jerusalem, the whole philosophy there is that we're wounded healers, right? That we, the best folks to help someone come off of heroin is someone who is recovering themselves, right? So maybe they're 9 years sober, or they're 2 years sober, or they're 3 days sober. They've all got something to offer on that journey of recovery and healing. And we're all recovering from something, and so we can learn from each other. We can heal together. It's a pretty different way of thinking about it from like a lot of the professionalized social providers. There's probably something to, learn from each, because we do have professional social workers. We've got counselors, that are trauma informed therapists, all that stuff. So there's like both the learned knowledge and the street knowledge, the experiential stuff. And we, all the time we say our scars are not our limitations, they're our credentials. Like the things that you've survived equip you to help others. The best folks to help women in domestic violence are folks that have survived it. So we're all working together. And on the wall at New Jerusalem, they have a quote that says, "We cannot fully recover until we help the society in which we grew sick recover." It's a really powerful way of naming that this is about individual decisions, and it's also about economics and systems and structures, and you can't really separate those from each other. So I love that, because there is a lot of recovery community that's just about the individual choices, and that's got to be a piece of it, right? But if it leaves out this whole other piece that that there's a social and economic piece of that we've all got to be addressing too, then we kind of, I think, miss a part of the picture, Yeah, so I think that's, a part of what we're trying to do is to, on our front door at the Simple Way, it says, "Oh God, heal our hearts, heal our streets, heal our world." And we're trying to like live into that prayer, so like with recovery, to affirm the dignity of folks, even when it's really hard to see past the current like sickness that someone's in, and it's really hard to do that at the same time that we're affirming the dignity of neighbors that constantly have human excrement on their steps and going like, your kids don't need to come out to that either. So it's like I'm sure you're dealing with that every day, so I should be asking you how you're dealing with it. But yeah, it's hard, but that's, I think that's part of what's radical about what we're trying to do, is to say, yes, the person who's addicted or suffering from substance addiction disorder, this is like, this person's made in the image of God just as much as I am. So is this neighbor who's really, really angry right now, and justifiably angry. Maybe they're not expressing it in the best way, but there's reasons that they're upset, so yeah. I'm still keeping an eye on y'all on the Zoom screen here, so feel free to give a wave if you want to, but yeah, go
I
ahead.
just wanted to say I really liked what you said, like our scars are not like our limitations but our power, because I feel like that really resonates no matter where we're going with all of our ministries, that like that can kind of resonate for each and every one of us. It's something from our past and something from our lives is kind of why we're going in the direction that we're going. So I just like really appreciate that. Like my brother, he was junior in college, so yeah, like 3-4 years ago, was like super addicted to opiates and like still in the family and everything. And like now he's an in-care like aide, and he's like a CN, and he's using those like past experiences to like help Alzheimer's like patients and stuff like that. So like I really like appreciate like that idea of ministry, because that's true, like all of our pasts are like helping our futures.
Yeah, it's a good word. And just to say a little bit more about that, I really think as I was thinking about you all and the diverse gifts and experiences, walks of life that you come from, there's a couple of things that I feel like have proved to be really true for us and for me. One of them is that old saying of Frederick Buechner, which is my paraphrase of it, is we've got to take our deepest passions and connect them to the world's deepest pain. That when we connect our skills, our passions to the yet to be redeemed parts of our neighborhoods, of our world, like it really brings life to everybody, to us and to the people that we're working with. And so that's why, I think Eastern's been, really good at this historically, at really asking, not just are you going to be a doctor or a lawyer, but what kind of doctor or lawyer are you going to be? That's a Campola line. Right? So, and what's important isn't just what you do, but how you do it. And it's the difference, really, I think, between a vocation and a job, right? Just something that just pays the bills, or something that feels missional and life-giving, and that's contributing to the kingdom of God, right? This bigger vision of God redeeming the world. And there's so many ways that can take shape. Tony often tells a story of, not just going to the best schools, but going to the schools with the least resources. So like our best teachers, not just going to the schools in Radnor, but coming to the schools in Kensington. Our best doctors going to places that like, Esperanza Health Center at K&A, where we are struggling. We need a health center. Not that you don't need it in Paoli either, but these are like leaning into the suffering of the world, right? We've got lawyers, Tony often talks about Brian Stevenson, who went from Eastern to Harvard and then went to Montgomery and is doing incredible work. So connecting our gifts and passions to that, but also, what you were saying, that we're it's not just our skills, but also the things that we've survived, right? Also the things that we're connecting our story to other people's story. And that it's both our gifts and passions, but also the parts of our lives that we might be ashamed of, or the things that we've survived that we're connecting to other people as well. And those I think that's where the magic happens. So when we even had a plumber that showed up and was like, I've been a plumber my whole life. I just want to, live it the simple way for a few weeks and help people. And I mean, we got a list of everybody in the neighborhood that had a toilet that didn't work. Some of them didn't even have running water. Some of our neighbors don't. And so we had neighbors that their sink's been leaking for 2 years, or their garbage disposal hasn't worked. And so this guy just like went through that list and got to know folks. And I mean, it was a divine appointment. We're like, we might need you more than a month, but I think that's kind of that's where the magic happens, So yeah. One or two more, anybody else, other thoughts? Or yeah.
So don't take these as my words, but I've heard some criticism of you in that you're sometimes moderate, especially in your approach to abortion. What do you say to that? Like, what's your sort of response to that kind of criticism?
Wow, well, this is nice. So, well, I think on abortion, I'm very transparent, especially in this new book, that I grew up saying I was pro-life, but I would be more accurate in saying I was pro-birth, because it's not enough just to be anti-abortion. Like, I think it's and some of what I began to see is that when it comes to abortion, some of the people who have been so publicly, vocally pro-life have actually been obstacles to some of the policies that would cut down the number of abortions. So I think the old language that was often used with abortion, which is that abortion should be legal, safe, and rare, and we should all work to make it rarer and rarer. I think that's helpful language. I think that the things that have proven to cut the number of abortions, which would be a goal of mine, is that the number one cause of abortion is lack of financial stability, not feeling like you have the resources to have a child or another child. And so what would help with that? Well, I think childcare, affordable childcare, healthcare, like all kinds of things that we could do to make sure that someone has what they need to carry out that. And it's our responsibility to advocate for those policies that would make it more of a possibility. I think there's other folks like Mother Teresa that I really admire because she didn't just have bumper stickers. Actually, I don't think she had any bumper stickers or even a car, but she didn't just hold signs that said abortion is murder or something. She took in young families and walked alongside of them and tried to make sure that they could have a life-giving, vital, way of living. And when I was in India, I worked with Mother Teresa, and I write about this a little bit. But when I got to Calcutta, everybody called her mother, and one of the young guys, he was like maybe 25 years old. He said, "Do you know why we call her mother?" I was like, "Tell me." And he said, "Because she's our mom for a lot of us." She said, "Some of us were abandoned in train stations. I mean, she saw us in all kinds of different situations and took us in, and ended up like the woman in the shoe with so many kids she didn't know what to do, and he started showing me all these things that Mother Teresa had given him over the years, just as a mom. And that kind of added a new level of depth and respect to the work that she was doing. And that's why for me, the question is, what does love require of us? Because bumper stickers and t-shirts and ideologies and opinions don't always necessarily come with that responsibility that love has. I also, in writing and talking about abortion, found that like 1 in 4 women have experienced abortion, and including people really close to me. And my wife writes her story in the book. My mom, who I didn't know had an abortion, so I think like we're probably closer to this. And I realize I'm saying this as a man, in this context, but like this is probably a lot closer to home than we would think. So we shouldn't just see this as like some ideological thing that we're shouting at each other about, but let's actually have a better conversation around it. And some of that for me is like asking, what are the things that might reduce the number of abortions, and find some common ground around that. I don't think that it's just policies immediately that people's mind go to making it illegal, but I do think that just like with guns, that there are common sense laws, and that some progressive folks would do better to say that we're not going to have abortions late in pregnancy unless someone's life's at stake, the mother or the child, and I have yet to find a single person that has had an abortion when that's not the case in the later part of their pregnancy. And so like, we're not going to all agree on when life begins. Is it, conception, breath, vitality, is it like, I think that we can agree that we are going to do the best that we can at protecting life of the mother and of the child, and creating policies that would affirm that as well. But it is interesting that people that immediately are trying to make laws to make abortion illegal are fighting laws that I think would save lives on guns. So I think we've got to also recognize those kind of contradictions, right? That like the legal option is the thing that we're going to do on abortion, but we're not going to. I mean, the same week that the Roe decision was overturned, the Supreme Court also ruled against states' rights to create gun laws, right? So literally, like when Philadelphia or a state says we don't want assault rifles, the Supreme Court is now saying they don't have the right to do that. So if Philadelphia made AR-15s illegal, which we voted on before, like it's overturned by the Supreme Court, and that's tragic, right? So there's that tension that we hold in all of our policies. But I would say like some of the folks that are saying they're pro-life are really not consistently pro-life, and even how we think about policies. So, yeah, I see your hand, Javar. Yeah, go.
Can I just put a bookmark before Javar speaks? Because I know some of you have class. So I think this is a beautiful conversation, and all you who want to stay to continue, and Shane's going to join us for lunch.
Yeah, looking forward to it.
Anyone who doesn't have a meal plan, lunch is on us. If you want to stay, we're going to walk over or drive over. But if you do have class at 11, want to give you freedom to get up and go, and then we'll try to wrap up this conversation and head on over to lunch. But maybe we can take 1 or 2 more questions. But if you do need to leave, feel free to do so.
Javar, go ahead, man. You should be able to unmute.
Yeah. So, from basically what I'm hearing is, you're proposing to basically stay consistent with your approach towards human life, right?
Yeah, man.
Okay, that's understandable. But I'll actually ask you a pretty hard question. Not to like be, facetious or anything like that, but just to see, like, would you consider abortion and taking of a human life?
Do I consider abortion the taking of a human life?
Uh-huh.
So yeah, so what I would say is I think that there are ways of thinking about life and the potential for life that, we kind of equate all as the same, right? So like the day after pill, is different from terminating a pregnancy 6 weeks in, which is different from terminating a pregnancy, even further in. So my perspective would be, I want to do what I can to advocate for life and to make life possible and sustainable for that child. And that also means, advocating for policies, but also adoption and foster care and, all these different things, like kind of at multiple levels. So I think the moment that God has began to create the potential for life at conception, I want to be an advocate for that life. And the way that we think about abortion now has evolved also from how people thought about it 2,000 years ago, where like contraception and medical procedures and things like that were really different from leaving a baby in the woods, which was a lot of what was done. And it was the men who always made decisions on when a woman could have a baby and could not, in like biblical times. But even in our country, we've done a lot to manipulate women's bodies as men. When women were enslaved, we used them to produce children that became currency for slavery. So this is all kind of a backdrop when we think about, the conversation now, that I think it's got to inform how we be advocates for life. So that's how I think of it. And I do a lot of listening these days to women and to others who are really impacted. And I'm trying to avoid the kind of culture wars that are just beating each other to death around ideology, but it's not really creating much substantial change. It's not good news for the people that have been directly impacted. And again, man, that's why I really look to Mother Teresa as one example, because she didn't just have these convictions. She really showed that love and hospitality in real concrete ways. And it wasn't just on abortion. I mean, she called governors the night before executions and told them to show mercy, because Jesus said, "Blessed are the merciful." So I think like the question I'm raising, Jamar, is that like, how do we think beyond issues and become advocates for life? I think abortion is one of the most complicated because Jesus doesn't mention it. Scripture doesn't really have any strong teaching. I mean, we can attribute things to when I formed you in the womb, I knew you, or, there's things that we can infer on the value of life, but it's a more complicated social issue than some of the other ones. So, but I began by saying, every person's made in the image of God, and let's figure out how we can be the biggest champions for that.
Okay. Well,
Yeah.
thank you. I have to go to class right now. So
Yeah, man.
thank you.
Hand in hand. Well, we're gonna
All right.
get together, but I just want to say, for all of you, it's a real gift to be together, and I will be praying for you and cheering you on as you continue your studies. We're going to keep looking for all kinds of ways that we can cross-pollinate with the work that we're doing in Kensington and what's happening here at Eastern. So yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you.
That's great. Well, thanks you guys online, and who's gonna walk over to lunch, or a bunch of you gonna stay for lunch, guys? Okay, great. Well, we can just kind of wrap up and do you?
I was gonna grab a picture.
Okay, with Shane and us, or just Shane?
No,
With all of us. Okay, great.
We still on video? Just wanna pause it?
You wanna take it?
I can take it, yeah.
Should we just sit right there? Is that what you're thinking? Or
Robert, yeah.
Well, we might, I don't know, we might have to